Does the bed show indications that she got up and out of bed and had a confrontation with somebody, or was she taken from her bed? What does the blood look like inside the house? I went out and visited the house. I was actually out in Tucson. The blood stops at the end of that walkway.
Today, I'm joined by Morgan Wright, who is a former detective, and he currently serves as the CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, and he's here with us to talk about the Nancy Guthrie case. So, Mr. Wright, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
Hey, just call me Morgan, Jackson. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Of course. So to get right into it, it's now been over a month and a half since Nancy Guthrie first went missing, and I think what a lot of people are struggling with right now is the feeling that whoever is responsible might be getting away with it. So how is it that after 7 weeks we still don't have a clear person of interest? Or a suspect, or at the very least someone connected to this case being held in custody?
And this is really the part that's troubling a lot of people. After several weeks, there's still no clear suspect, which usually points to either very limited evidence or someone who planned this more carefully than expected.
You know, Jackson, that's the silver bullet question. I mean, if we can answer that, that's the one everybody wants to know. I would tell you that Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, got away with his crimes for years. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, got away with his crimes for years, and yet he was kidnapping women, vulnerable women, off the streets of Seattle in plain view of the police and doing this. So it is not that unlikely to think that somebody could get away with this, but it all boils down to kind of what you and I were talking at the beginning. It really determines how easy it's going to be to find this person is to make sure we have the crime correct. And I don't think we really know what the crime is. Either the crime was a burglary that went wrong, or it was never a burglary. And that's going to determine the type of people you look for, the type of suspects, different skill sets, if you follow what I'm saying. But if I'm looking for a burglar in my days when I was doing the work, when I'm looking for a burglar, we knew people that did burglary. We knew what kind of skills they did. We know what kind of things they do, where they hung out, what their tool set would look like, what type of actions they would take before. People are creatures of habit. People behave the same. The 9/11 hijackers, the 7/7/05 train bombings, Lashkar-e-Taiba, the attackers in Mumbai, everybody, even terrorists, follow what we call the terrorism planning cycle. So when I look at this, the first thing we have to come to terms with, was it a burglary gone wrong, or was it never a burglary? And then to your point, Jack, once we start addressing that the way we should, that'll start telling us what kind of person should we be looking for? Because somebody who does targeted kidnappings and targeted abductions is a different skill set and a different methodology and a different tradecraft than somebody who's only there to commit burglary.
We actually had a former FBI special agent on the show, Jen Fender, a couple of weeks back, and she walked us through a possible sequence of events, explaining how the individuals involved may have entered the home and the kind of approach they might have taken, and it sounded like she was leaning toward the idea that more than one person could be involved, that this wasn't simply a burglary that went sideways, and that there may have even been access through a back entrance. So given that you've spent time really looking into this case, I'm curious, based on everything that's available right now, how would you lay out your own version of what might have happened?
Yeah, Jackson, good question, because that's what everything starts from, right? The house is the event generator. So the first thing we have to understand, was it a burglary that got wrong, or was it never a burglary? And then when I'm looking at this, if I'm showing up to the scene, then I look for a burglary. If it's a burglary that's gone wrong, then the biggest question you have to ask, because remember, humans don't behave better under stress. They behave worse under stress. You shoot worse, you drive worse, you run worse. When you think about this, somebody who enters a house whose intention was burglary, their intention was theft, what conditions had to exist inside the house for a burglar to think that kidnapping somebody and taking them out of the house was less risky than just fleeing? In so many cases, I will tell you, I never had a case. There was sometimes violence, but I never had a case in a burglary to where somebody kidnapped the person, even though it's at night. They thought the house, even if they broke into the house knowing the homeowner was in there, they didn't want the confrontation. That's why they break in at night. That's why they break in while people are asleep. That's why they try and find an unlocked door, because an unlocked door is easier to get into than breaking out the glass. I look at that and I say, what are the indicators that would tell you that it was a burglary gone wrong? Well, then you'd have to look at signals of theft. Were items staged inside the house to be taken? We know that the offender, we can see the video, had a backpack, typical what burglars do, want to keep their hands free. They use the bite light, again, keep their hands free. Same thing for auto burglars. They're basically set the same way. One's breaking into a car, one's breaking into a house. So I would look for what signals existed inside the house to tell me that this was a burglary gone wrong. Then you would have to show me, then why would that offender think that taking a body and increasing my risk, because then this does lead into, at some point there is, I believe, a second person involved, and I'll get to that on my other side of the binary question. Oh, and here's one other thing, Jackson, a lot of people aren't talking about. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about this, because a lot of people don't think through the whole thing. When I ask you, like, how do you get out of bed in the morning? It sounds like a weird question, but trust me, it's going to lead somewhere. How do you get out of bed in the morning?
Well, from my perspective, I'd say I'd pull the blanket off, put my feet on the floor, and just sit there on the edge of the bed for a moment before getting up.
That's exactly right. That's what people do. A lot of say, I get out of bed, I take the blanket. Now, let's assume it's 2 o'clock in the morning. You're in a house all by yourself, and somebody decides that they want to abduct you. They're going to reach in and grab you out of your bed. Do you think the blanket and everything's going to be folded back the same way?
No.
What we're looking for are indicators. What does even the bedroom look like? Does the bed show indications that she got up and out of bed and had a confrontation with somebody, or was she taken from her bed? So that gets into, was it a targeted abduction? Then with the targeted abduction, again, you look for three things: entry, forced, consensual, or pre-staged. In this case, we know it was not pre-staged because we see the offender on the outside of the home. Then the question becomes, was it forced or consensual? Chances are she wouldn't open the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's human behavior. So what I've seen much of the drone video that flies around, there's no indications that there was forced entry. But here's the thing. She's 84 years old, lives in an area where very little crime, if any. Look, I'm pretty security conscious. I left my garage door open all night. And it's like, man, I forgot I did that. Is it unrealistic to think that an 84-year-old woman who just gets into a habit, thinks that her doors are locked, may have left the door open? That would have facilitated an entry into the home to make it easy. But at that standpoint, to finish the other part of the binary, if they got into the home and it was a targeted abduction, I used to tell our teams a lot of times, especially our tactical teams, don't kick down the door. See if the door's open first. Why kick down the door when it's already unlocked? We don't need to do that. So they could have gotten in that way if it was a targeted abduction. Then what we have is an 84-year-old woman, cardiac compromise, being waken up violently at 2 o'clock in the morning. We know that there's blood. The question is, what does the blood look like inside the house? Is it a blood trail, which then leads you can reasonably infer that there's a second person because there's no pooling of blood. That person is not laying there. So there has to be then somebody that you call, because we know the blood. And I went out and visited the house. I was actually out in Tucson. I took a look on the ground. The blood stops at the end of that walkway. You come down a set of steps, come out to the driveway. It ends right there. So it seems likely that this is a targeted abduction, because how unlikely is it? We know from the timeline at 2:12 was when there was a motion inside the house, is what they're saying, according to the sheriff's timeline. 2:28, her pacemaker did not ping. So we have a 16-minute window.
That timeline is extremely tight, and it raises an important question. Was there really enough time for something like a burglary to suddenly turn into an abduction? Or does this suggest it may have been planned from the start?
Somebody who was there to commit burglary instead decides, I'm going to kidnap somebody, and now has to arrange all of the infrastructure, the transportation, the logistics, get somebody to come over. That becomes less tenuous. If the only thing supporting that pillar is narrative, once you take the narrative away, does that structural beam still stand? No. So over time, I started with the binary. I'm leading more and more towards it's a targeted abduction that went wrong.
And when you say something went wrong, what are some of the different scenarios that come to mind for you, just to give a few examples? I mean, as you mentioned earlier, she did have pre-existing health issues, so it could have been something like respiratory failure or a cardiac event. Or on the other hand, it could have been something that happened as a result of the people involved. So when you think about it, what possibilities stand out to you the most in terms of how things could have taken a turn?
What we know for a fact is that it's Nancy Guthrie's blood. We don't know how the blood got there. We don't know the mechanism of injury. So we don't know, did she cut herself on the way out of the bedroom? Was she assaulted? But in any event, you have an 84-year-old woman with a cardiac condition, woken up, I would say, violently at 2 o'clock in the morning, taken from her home. So there's control on the other side. So when I look at that, here's my concern. I know a lot of people that, and trust, I get that everybody says, well, we hope she's still alive. They acted as though it's a missing person. But at some point, I started saying the quiet part out loud, because it informs how you do your investigation. It informs what the public thinks. In fact, with you guys, you're reporting on it. What the public is told is the way they perceive the case. There's things you go through. You go through things that are known. You go through things that are inferred. You go through things that are assumed, right? We have to be, and then amplified. The media amplifies. We take what is known, then we infer something, then we assume it's true, and then the media amplifies it. If the media, and not saying that they're doing it intentionally, but if you amplify something that's incorrect, now I'm looking for a missing person. What I said was we should start treating this as a no-body homicide, because that changes your search tactics, that changes what you communicate to the public. I have no information other than just experience, but just reasoning it out to say that the reason that we haven't caught anybody, it's because these two actors, if Nancy died within a short amount of time of when she was taken control of, they would have realized that it was less risky to dispose of the body. Now, we're not looking for a concealed clandestine gravesite. It's very hard. I've been out in that area, the part of the desert. It's very tough to dig. So we're looking for a body dump an open gravesite or we're looking for a concealed gravesite. But the other thing too, I would just leave with you, Jackson, think about this, that the reward now is up to what, 1.2, $1.3 million.
Mhm.
I'm telling you right now, you and I just met, but I would dime you out for $50,000. You can now you put 1.2 million on the table. If that doesn't move the needle, what does that tell you? I would say it's a very small group of people, no less than one, and I'd say no more, obviously no less than one, but no more than two involved in this, because if one person knows a secret and they tell somebody, it's no longer a secret. So I would say no more than two people involved, because 1.2 million hasn't moved the needle yet.
That's interesting because from what you're saying, it sounds like you believe there were no more than two individuals involved. And it also seems similar to what Savannah has been suggesting publicly on social media, which is that Nancy may no longer be alive. And if that's the case, then we are likely looking at a homicide, which is obviously tragic, but for the sake of discussion, let's move forward with that assumption. So let me put you in a hypothetical situation. If the Guthrie family brought you in to work the case independently, putting aside agencies like the FBI or the Puma County Sheriff's Office, what specific strategies or methods would you rely on to figure out what happened to Nancy Guthrie and ultimately where she went?
So I'm going to make an assumption here. I'm going to assume that I have access to everything law enforcement has, from an information standpoint. So if
Okay.
I have the same thing, the example I would give you, and I know you guys have covered it, Rex Sherman, the Long Island serial killer, Gilgo Beach. That case was not solved with new evidence. That case was solved with evidence they already had, and it took a fresh set of eyes to go back in. So I think this is the point in the case where you need to take a step back and say, park your pride at the door, park your ego at the door. Let's bring in new people and take a fresh set of eyes. I would operate as that fresh set of eyes. I would have no assumptions. I wouldn't let the media narrative, I wouldn't let the sheriff's narrative or anybody's narrative influence me. You deconstruct it, crime reconstructed. You deconstruct it from a first principle standpoint back into its foundational pieces. You fix the structural problems and then you rebuild back up. I would look at technical things, which I know they're doing, cell site location information. I would start looking at another thing. It's called AdTech. It's a company I work with called Fog Data. We do a lot of this type of analysis where we look at, for example, you've got a phone. I know everybody does. You've got apps that run on this phone, regardless of the carrier. Those apps collect data because the end user license agreement says you agree to allow us to collect that data from the app maker. A lot of people don't read the fine print, but it's in there. Well, we can aggregate those and look at signals. So I did a whole signals analysis around Nancy's house looking for things. The other thing you do is you do an egress analysis. You look at, there are only so many ways to get to a main road when you leave Nancy's house. And I've been out there, like I said, it's like a bowl of spaghetti. You turn it upside down, those roads go all over the place. But at some point, they get back to structured roads that lead down to other structured roads and interstate. So you start looking at that, you start saying, as we do our canvas, and I was out there, I tell you, Jackson, the thing I was surprised of, a lot of the businesses did not have cameras on the outside of their business. I saw very few in some of the major intersections that you would have gone through. The other thing too is, it's what I know they're doing, but you work your informant network. It's human intelligence, human. You start working your informant networks. What have you heard? What do you know? You look for the non-obvious. I know a lot of people say, well, she could have been taken to Mexico. I did a Substack with a friend of mine named Aaron Graham. He was DEA. He was actually targeted for kidnapping by one of the cartels when they moved him from Mexico to Tucson. Another friend of mine, retired ATF, Pete Verselli, he worked for ATF. He did home invasion investigations in Tucson and Phoenix. We talked about those things. So I would go back and I would start looking for the non-obvious thing. The other thing too I would do, Jackson, is I don't care what everybody else has said or investigated, because to them it becomes canonical, it becomes sacred. You can't touch the narrative. The narrative, we've worked on this narrative. Here's our evidence. This is our interpretation of it. Well, the problem is you have the physical layer, the things that exist. Then you have the evidentiary layer. Evidence doesn't mean anything until meaning is applied to it, until interpretation is applied to it. So you go to the interpretation layer, and then then you move up from the interpretation layer to the narrative layer. Well, too many people jump from evidence to narrative, which we're seeing right now. I've done a lot of analysis on the James Gracie case over in Barcelona. First when he was missing, now that he's been recovered, and the Spanish police are saying all indications are that it was an accident. And my question is, how do you know? You haven't done an autopsy. You haven't done anything yet. How do you know? So we have to be careful of jumping to that narrative. So I would deconstruct everything back into the atomic, basically the atoms, the atomic level, and work backwards from that. Is it time consuming? Is it painstaking? Yeah. But we're talking about kidnapping. We're talking about potentially murder. These are the most serious crimes you can commit in a society, and you need to be dedicated to doing that. So I would bring everything to bear. There's forensic analysis, there's cell site analysis, there's ad tech, but just what we used to call Goya code. I was taught by some of the original members of the FBI's behavioral science unit. They called it Goya code. Get off your ass, knock on doors. Sometimes it's just shoe leather. Sometimes you got to go out and just knock on doors and do follow-up. So I can't promise you that would get results. But what can I tell you? If I were going to do this, I would start and I wouldn't listen to what anybody else's assumptions were. I'd bring in a team, I'd isolate them, and I'd work the evidence from the ground up and go back and take nothing for granted. I don't care what your assumptions were. We disregard everything. We rebuild the case from the ground up. And that's if I did that, that's how I would approach it.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier that caught my attention. You talked about the range of technology available, both to you and to law enforcement, that could potentially be used to track down whoever is responsible. So I'm curious, where does AI fit into all of this, if at all, and do you think it can realistically play a role in helping solve a case like this?
I don't want to sound like I'm pimping out my Substack, but I wrote an article about AI and the use of this in cases like this, right? But AI only works if the data exists. If the data doesn't exist, AI can't help you because you can't create the data. And that's the problem with hallucinations with AI. But what it can do is that if you can compile a large corpus, put all the information in one, you can't connect the dots unless you collect the dots, and the dots all have to be in one place. And that's the premise behind the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases. I would say it's, you put the police and the public on a single platform, put all the dots in one place, connect the dots. AI can help with that. AI can help with non-obvious relationships. AI can help and here's the biggest thing about AI though, Jackson. AI has to have guardrails too. You just cannot say, hey, ChatGPT, who killed Nancy Guthrie or who abducted her? You can't do that, right? So we actually, and one of the things we teach at the National Center and one of our law enforcement liaisons, I teach we're actually developing the rest of the course right now, but it's called Structured Prompts and AI for Criminal Investigations. It's how do you use structured prompts so that you can take advantage of open source. I do this on fugitive cases for the U.S. Marshals. One of our law enforcement liaisons just worked with the Texas Rangers on one of their cases, gave them 19 pages of information they did not know exist because we used a structured prompt. So there are a lot of creative ways that we can use technology. You have to define what you want out of it first. You cannot just say, hey, Claude, hey, Grok, go do this. Context. What's the role that you're assuming? Are you an analyst? Are you an investigator? Are you a reporter? Make sure that it asks you questions to clarify and deepen the understanding of what the task is, and then give it a task. I want you to produce a report. The structured prompt just for homicide investigations that I use is 2 pages long. That's not actually a long prompt considering some of the others, but it's long enough that it does what we need it to do. So that's the danger with AI. It has a lot of promise, but it is not a silver bullet. It has to be constrained. It's a weapon, but it has to be pointed in the correct direction, given the constraints that it operates under. And then anything that you do, you have to double check it. But it can look through 10 million lines of code in seconds to where it would take me days or weeks. So that's the advantage. It's speed and accelerating the momentum of the case.
Morgan, you've been absolutely great. I really appreciate all the insight you've shared today. And before we wrap up, I just want to ask you one final question. Do you believe this case will eventually be solved?
There's 2 things. There's cases that are closed and cases that are resolved. I don't think this case will ever, because you can close a case without resolving all the major issues. We've done that on homicides before, where if they do it with fugitives, 100 years later, pretty sure the guy's dead. So you can close the case, but you haven't resolved the structural issues in it. This case, I think all the information they need to solve the case is in their possession. All the information we needed to solve the DC sniper was in our possession. I did a whole briefing to the FBI on that. Do I think it? I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that they have to continue to take the steps. If the case is solved, I think it's going to come down to a lucky break. Sometimes you need luck. Sometimes I'd rather be lucky than good, as they say. Sometimes you need a citizen that overhears. Time, the other thing too, we found with unsolved homicides that have gone on for 10, 15 years, a fraternity brother of mine retired as a Cincinnati detective, but before he did, they went back and solved a 44-year-old case of the only unsolved officer killed in Cincinnati. And they did it because they went back and they just did interviews. And the family members said, "Oh, you're here because my dad killed that cop with a 38," which was exactly it. They were able to at that point not only close the case but resolve the case. They couldn't prosecute him because he was dead. It's kind of a roundabout answer, but these are the toughest things to answer. Do I want it solved? Yeah. Will it be solved? Not up to me. It's up to the evidence. It's up to the people. It's up to the perpetrators maybe making a mistake, information getting out. But that's why you have to maintain persistence. That's why you have to keep following up on this. Sometimes uncertainty, you have to accept uncertainty and embrace it. I don't know. But I know that if you take these steps, you put yourself in the best positions to be available for when that opportunity arises, you can solve the case.
Morgan, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thanks again for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it.